Hello and welcome to another video on TCGplayer.com. My name is Steve Rubin, and a little bit of Pauper talk going around recently, and I've had a deck that I've played in Pauper for a very long time. One of the more budget options in Pauper, but also quite potent and quite good. You know, Classic Burn is a deck that has existed in Pauper in a long time, and before there were lots of degenerate combo decks. Now, you know, they banned Grape Shot, a lot of the combo decks are slower. Burn has a much better place in the metagame, and I'm going to go ahead and run it through a league here. First off, we have 19 lands, 3 Forgotten Caves, which just help you not flood. It's pretty important that you have the capability to not flood out, because you just need to deal your opponent 20 damage straight up, and in Pauper, there are no fetch lands that deal you damage or shock lands, so lots of people are at high life totals and you have to go all the way through. So just making sure that we have land drops that can cycle. These are awesome. You don't play 4, which you figure that you might want to play 4, but I think the reasoning is that you have the Fire Blasts, and you don't really ever want to play Forgotten Cave if you don't have to, basically. So you want to be able to Fire Blast people out. Especially sometimes you draw 2 Fire Blasts, and it's very hard to get to the mountain count. And then we have 16 mountains. Just a very typical 19 land count. Pretty straightforward. All mountains. No funny business other than Forgotten Caves. Getting onto the spells. So let's go ahead and go from the bottom, because we have the 4 elves. 4 Needle Drop. Just great in this format because, you know, the decks are a little slower. This is essentially just, there aren't that many good burn spells to choose from. And Needle Drop synergizes with your creature base, which we'll talk about in a second. But pretty much, you know, Fireblend, Archer, and Thermo-Alchemist essentially give your cards spell power, you know, like Hearthstone, or they give your cards, pretty much have prowess, even though they don't actually get pumped. So spells like this that cycle and deal damage are good. Lightning Bolt, classic burn spell, happens to be a common, so it's obviously great here in the burn deck. Lets you actually kill creatures, which is really nice. 4 Lava Spikes, 4 Chain Lightnings, everything's pretty straightforward. 1 Burst Lightning. There's like a few flex slots in the burn deck, and sometimes I find just having a lot of cheap spells is good, because it allows you to not only kill your opponent's creatures, but it lets you build up to a lets you just kind of, you know, when you play a Thermo-Alchemist or a Firebrand Archer, throw a bunch of spells out really quickly, kill your opponent really quickly when you're tight on mana. And Burst Lightning is the one I throw in because, you know, if you do flood out a little bit, it does give you a bit of a kickback there with the kicker. 4 Searing Blades, pretty standard. Actually kind of awkward here because you're playing a very low land count without fetch lands, so it's not quite the same as you would see in a modern burn deck, but they're a lot more creature decks, so it tends to be pretty good. But it is awkward, and you do cast it a lot in this deck without landfall, because you can't reliably achieve landfall. 4 Thermo-Alchemist, 4 Fireblend Archer. Now, it's funny because when I first started playing this deck again after a hiatus from Pauper, I saw people playing Firebrand Archer, and I said, that can't possibly be good. You know, it's just, people are just playing it because it's from the new set, but it is actually insanely good, because essentially how it works is, unlike Thermo-Alchemist that needs a turn to live, lots of decks have lots of removal, so very often you're untapping with a Thermo-Alchemist, but the Archers basically deal damage right away. So what you do is you end up holding burn spells, and it's almost like a value burn spell that's also a creature, because you get into a spot where you're just top decking and you hold all your burn spells, so that if you do draw Firebrand Archer, all your burn spells do +1, and then it's still a creature. If you ever hit somebody with this, it just feels so good. It's just so much damage already, regardless of what it can do in combat. So it's pretty much just a way of, you know, bursting your opponent down from the top, or if your opponent doesn't have a removal spell, they're pretty much dead if it ever hits them, because that free damage is going to add up with all the bonus spell damage. Curse of the Pierced Heart, kind of a weak card if you play against any fast decks, but this is an important card in the deck, because when you play against control decks, they have a lot of counter spells and gain lands and stuff like that. Lands that gain them life, and bounce lands to return them. So you need some sort of consistent source of damage, and Curse of Pierced Heart is the best you have in Pauper. There's no Sophia Vortex, there's no Eidolon, anything like that. You're playing with Curse of the Pierced Heart, but there are some matchups where it's your best card. 4 Rift Bolt, pretty standard, same as Lightning Bolt. You see 4 of it in every burn deck. Stagger Shock, that's kind of my inclusion, and 4 Fire Blast is very good with the prowess type, and if you do end up with 3 lands, it is nice to have like a spell that deals more damage, you know, like just not having more 3 damage spells. This one actually does 4 or maybe even more with the prowess creatures. And Stagger Shock is important to this build because I kind of have like a control sideboard plan that involves starting in Stagger Shocks. So let's go ahead and look at the sideboard. We have 1 Blazing Volley, 1 Electricity. This is because there are a lot of like green go wide decks or elf decks, stuff like that, and having AoE area of effect. Sorry, I don't know why I'm in the League of Legends mode right now, but having sweepers is very important. 4 Martyr of Ashes. This is one of the reasons that mono red can exist, because decks that are faster than you get to side in 4 Martyr of Ashes, and it just blows up the entire board to buy you time. 3 Smash to Smithereens. This is for affinity, and also some control decks that are using like Pristine Talisman and Signets and stuff like that. 2 Stagger Shocks. This is part of the, you don't have enough lands to play more, but this is part of that sideboard package I was talking about, where you side in a Stagger Shock, and you can actually, against like mono green decks, you can actually like bolt and rift bolt their creatures, and pretty much eventually you're going to draw into a Firebrand Archer and some Stagger Shocks and be able to control them out. And then 4 Molten Rain. These are for Tron decks, and also just decks that are using bounce lands. Like when you play against control, they're really good. So that is that. Let's go ahead and get into the games. It's a pretty straightforward deck. You know, if you, I'm not sure exactly how many tickets it is, but if you want to get into a Magic Online format, it's definitely a budget deck. Obviously, Burn is kind of one of those decks where you know what you're getting into. You're gonna have a lot of games where if you draw, you need to draw any spell in your deck and you win, or if you don't, you lose. So if you're not ready for the sort of ebbs and flows of playing a Burn deck, I don't necessarily think you should go ahead and buy this deck right away. But if you want to just kind of, if you already have played Burn and you know you like it, it's definitely fun in Pauper because it's pretty powerful deck. So I'll see you guys for round 1.